You all here. I am very proud to be able to welcome you all, to be honest. My name is Barbara. I have just joined as the coordinator of the Internet of Production Alliance. And we are a global alliance of people, organizations that all have a common goal to create an open Internet of Production. And you'll hear more about that when the speakers speak. It is really exciting to be able to launch this now, and what's even greater is that we have just the right people to present it. But before we get to our speakers, I just have some hosting points. As usual, please do use the chat for discussions. If you have any questions along the way, we will have a Q&A session at the end, but you can start writing them already in the Q&A section so that we don't lose track of them. We have Twitter handles, which you see on the first slide right here. Do use them as well. Open Nowhere Twitter handle is brand new and needs a lot of friends, so it will be great if you can get the message out there. And without further ado, here is the list of all the great people you'll be hearing from now, who are basically the team behind the Open Nowhere, and or the ones who are making it a reality right now and using it in practice. The points we'll be talking about today are on the next slide. And it's quite simple, actually. We will start by talking about where the Open Nowhere comes from, where we've come from, how it came to be. Then we'll talk about what's happening now, where it's being used, how that is going, the impact it's having. We'll talk about what will happen next and how you can get involved in that. And then we'll conclude on why that matters. We'll open up then the Q&A session, but as I said, please write your questions ahead of them so that they don't get forgotten as the great speakers speak. And with that, I will hand over to the very first one, the person who chaired the task force that created the Open Nowhere standard, Anna Sarah Lowe.
Thanks very much, Barbara. And I'd like to just add to Barbara's welcome to everyone here today. My organisation is called Manufacturing Change. I'm also a member of the Internet of Production Alliance, which we'll hear a bit more about later. And as Barbara said, I was asked to chair the working group for the Open Nowhere standard. Now, I think the first question that we have to answer is, why is a standard needed at all? There are lots and lots of mapping initiatives out there, as we discovered when we started thinking about this topic. They're done by companies, NGOs, governments, communities, even individuals in some cases. They range from the local to the global. And it's data that is touching on some aspect of manufacturing capacity, but it's all been collected for different purposes and with different questions in mind, and so taking different slants on what data is to be collected and how it's to be stored or shown. Now, we don't think that anyone is ever going to have a hope of centralising all this data, and nor should they. I think that if we are to move the world towards a place where it's easy for people to get things that they need manufactured close to where they live, then we're actually going to need way more mapping initiatives, not less. So we would like to see these kind of initiatives proliferate, but in order to make the data that is collected more useful so that it can be used beyond the initial purpose that it's been collected for, there does need to be some kind of a standard that would, define what some of the key data points are, map different types of fields to each other, set out what certain terms mean, and so on. So we think a standard is really necessary. So we then wanted to look at what kind of standard is needed. And on the next slide, please, we believe that the standard should be open, even if the data that is within it isn't. So the standard is what defines the data, and it doesn't actually doesn't give the information that there is a particular machine in this particular location. some data is made openly available, but there are often privacy concerns. There are business models built on top of some of these data sets. So the data itself may not be made public, but if you have a common standard, it still means that more use can be made of that data, whether it's in an anonymized form, whether it's in an aggregated form. There are ways and means to share information across data sets. We wanted something that would be really widely applicable for many different contexts, different purposes, different ways of mapping, including, so some mapping initiatives have been done basically from outside the building. So you can tell there is a factory in this location and it looks like they do something with metal. Whereas other initiatives have actually gone into different buildings and found out that in this location there is a type 2 machine of a particular brand that has this capacity. We also needed a standard to be extensible, because there are going to be many uses that this kind of thing can be put to that we haven't even thought of yet. We think it's going to become important to build on this common platform that was defined in the standard that we've already defined, to develop sort of sector specific guides and so on, so that for different purposes there is some more specificity around how to use the data standard. So I'm just now going to tell you a little bit about the process that we used to develop the standard. Thanks to the support of the Shuttleworth Foundation, we were able to engage Next to do the technical authoring of the standard, and they employed a data analyst to go through the a data scientist to analyze the different data sets and do a mapping of those. So there was desk-based research. We did a number of interviews with many stakeholders, both people who'd taken part in mapping initiatives and people who wanted to use the kind of data that came from them. Looked at what open standards already might be applicable. An initial iteration of a data model was designed and then iterated over a process of several months. We had an 18-member working group. We were very grateful to the people who gave up their time to be on that group, some of whom I think are here today. They sort of looked at all of the detail that was emerging and made decisions when there was needed, both about the data model itself and about classifications that were used within it. So we got to a first version of the standard by about October last year. And since then, there has been some initial testing done to use it. You're going to hear much more about one of those tests in a few minutes' time. And here we are today launching the standard, and we want many more people to adopt it and spread its use around. So I'm going to hand over now to Tom Bartley from Bartley.
Thank you, Anna. I'm just going to swap over screens. I'll stop Anna's sharing and I will share that. Thank you. So everyone, good afternoon. My name's Tom Bartley, or good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am the co-founder and CEO of Bartley. We're a software startup based in Bristol in the UK, but we also offer services to help people with standardization challenges. The key thing behind our platform and the way of working is all about consensus and helping experts work together more efficiently than they could do. Very much inspired by open source working on platforms like GitHub and the open source software movement, but applying that to technical documents. So just to recap on what Anna just said to us all, the OpenOS specification is a standard, defines a data model to help people document the location of manufacturing capabilities and share that information between different organizations. When we looked at this, as Anna said, there were 30 plus data sets that we looked at, and there were many different types of organizations mapping for very different reasons. And that spanned from commercial to governmental, non-governmental use, aid agencies, and as we saw over the past year with the requirement to manufacture PPE locally in the COVID-19 crisis, the need for local mapping became much more imperative. So the standard itself provides a common way of describing the key data that the stakeholders that were involved think they're important. As Anna said, there's a whole host of different use cases, and what we couldn't do was provide a prescriptive way of collecting data, or a prescriptive way of saying what the information would be used for. So crucially, what it doesn't do is provide a design for a database, or even a format for information exchange. We saw that people were using Excel and kind of very low-tech solutions for collecting data, and we saw other people working right at the pioneering end, thinking about internet-connected API-driven technologies and everything in between. So what we wanted to do was collect something that would allow people to exchange information and map data sets rather than necessarily integrate them directly or instantly. And crucially, we wanted to avoid creating new conventions where we could, looking at open standards where they exist, and reusing them as far as possible. And what came out was a conceptual model. And you can see it on the screen, and this features throughout the standard, that identifies a number of what we call classes, a number of properties, and it makes recommendations for how each field is used in the model. There are 5 classes or concepts that people will collect data about. We identified 76 properties and sub-properties, and we came up with 7 new classification schemes for different parts of the challenge of mapping this, and really the classification and the properties is the most important bit, so that people are describing things in the same way, no matter whether they're collecting information about for very different reasons. So when we looked at this, we saw people describing very different concepts. So the idea of facilities and just mapping, there's a factory there, as Anna said, or some people want to know specifically there is a machine in this location. And it was important that we knew what materials were worked. Location is obviously a key part of a mapping standard, and also the agents, the people or the organizations that might own, operate, license, use everything. And so what we did was we created these 5 classes and came up with a common set of properties for each of them. And in the next couple of minutes, I'll go through each of those 5 and just give a very quick outline of how each one works. The other thing that we did was we standardized classification schemes, and there were 7 areas where we classified relating to those classes. So we had facility type, facility status, the access type for a facility. So that's what model do they have? Is it closed? Is it a makerspace? Is it a something that can be accessed by the public, or is it something that's only privately operated? Typical batch size to give an indication of the scale at which that facility operates. We needed to classify manufacturing processes, classify equipment and materials. And the core approach that we did with this was we rather than trying to come up with a new classification scheme, we looked at an approach called product ontology. And what that essentially says is, rather than coming up with a new classification scheme, just reference the corresponding Wikipedia page for the thing that you're trying to describe. And so the examples here are soldering iron has a Wikipedia page. The process of soldering also has a Wikipedia page, and what that allows is to use Wikipedia as an open dictionary and classification scheme, and via Wikidata you can start to do translation between different languages as well. So the 5 classes, the first was facility, and what we recognized here was that facility could represent a factory down to a space with a machine in it or an operator in it. And so we came up with a standard set of properties and the classifications that came through with that. Typically, people working wanted to know who owned it, where was it, what does it do, and people mapping, is it currently operating, and different issues relating to whether it's a factory, and some specific aspects about in the developing world, does it have backup generated, is the power supply secure? but also thinking about things like maker spaces and fab labs and the innovation role that facilities can play. So also properties related to learning, education, and services beyond manufacturing that a facility might offer. Next, equipment, and we saw people mapping or cataloging or identifying where equipment is, and we use the word equipment rather than tools or machines because there's kind of, again, that whole range. And what we chose to do with that one was to say, well, you could describe equipment by its type, so specifically what type of tool is it, but also you could describe it by what manufacturing processes it can undertake. And the key thing there was to say, well, I need something that can bend metal. It might be a metal bender, or it might be something else. Sorry, I'm not actually a manufacturing person, so I'll lose the language sometimes. But it allows that kind of translation of, well, this is what we want to make, and these are the processes that we need. Therefore, we can change the recipe slightly, use a different machine, and still come out with the same made thing at the end of it. We also identified certain key classes of or types of equipment, and came up with 38 sub-properties mapped to those equipment types to give people a head start to say, if you're using a router, these are the kind of properties that we would expect to be collected about that product. And lots of aspects relating to throughput and how quickly a machine can manufacture and its condition. Materials were broadly outside the scope for Open Nowhere, and I know that Andrew has intention to do work around material manufacturing through the Internet Production Alliance in the future, but we did need to collect some information about materials in order to say, well, this machine is configured to work specifically with this type of material. And so again, we used the classification via the Wikipedia approach, but also we identified a defined list of material types that makes it easier to cross-reference through. Again, in that list, if you look at the standard, you'll see that that links back to Wikipedia, but it allowed us to go to the right level of specificity around plastics and not going very down to the molecular composition of that material, but not being too high level that you don't know whether it's suitable for your use or not. This is a mapping standard. Clearly, we're talking about location. Because we're talking about an internationally applicable standard, we use traditional street addresses that might be applicable in the Western world, but in other parts of the world, GPS or what 3 words are perhaps deemed more suitable, particularly where infrastructure isn't as robust, and equally allowing non-structured directions, so allowing people to describe it's the building next to X. So simple, but we did recognize the need to have different types of location systems supported. And finally, agent, and the word agent just is an encompassing term to say people or organizations. And typically that's about contact details that someone might need, whether that's the owner of a machine or the proprietor of a facility. And later on, that might be used to support the basis of skills passports and mapping the competencies of people to operate machines or to undertake certain manufacturing processes. So that's a very, very quick introduction. As I say, there's 78 properties and these different classes and an awful lot of detail and recommended formats for each of those data fields. Without being prescriptive about how you structure your data or how you exchange your data, it provides a solid framework from which people can build up data sets going forward. And we also mapped it to existing sets to say that actually it should be fairly straightforward for people to upgrade their existing data to be compatible with Open Nowhere. And that's my slot.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, what's really great is that we're now going to be able to see this put in practice with a use case from Uganda, from Deo Gracias, who will be unmuted and join you with his video right now. Hello, Deo.
Right. Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Deo Gracias Sugarday, and I'll be talking to you through the existing use case we have in Uganda. I do work with HOT, and yeah, next slide. So yes, so HOT is in usually the short term we have, but Humanitarian Open Street Map Team is an international organization that really tries to get people talking more about maps, talking about mapping, but really connecting that with the people around those maps, the people in those areas that we're trying to map through creating partnerships and really working through different technology innovations that can simplify people going on ground and actually locating and mapping different features. Next slide, please. So one of our really big missions is really to see how we can actually map every corner of the world without leaving anyone behind, but not just really mapping for the sake of mapping, but really mapping with people in mind, with people's needs to be put as the forefront, with people's ideologies put at the forefront as well, and really focusing with the local community who actually want to be mapped and really get them on having this information. And that is something that we really are passionate about at OpenStreetMap and Humanitarian OpenStreetMap in general, to actually see people who actually want to be mapped get be mapped, but mapping for their reason, not for only our reason. Next slide, please. And that is where we come up with one of the use cases we're looking at in Uganda, with support from Field Ready as well as a needs list. We are having a project called Protecting the Frontline, where we are having the local manufacturers actually mapping the manufacturing capacity within the country. We really believe in a kind of sustainable mapping process as what, and that is where we get to equip the local communities themselves to be able to actually map for the information that they want to actually have on the map. And that is where we're really focusing on actually having the local community manufacturers who actually always know each other. It's always very interesting to find that most of the local manufacturers know each other. They know who does what, they know who's coming up with the new innovation, and they always really usually even meet up, come up with new ways of combining resources, or sometimes sharing resources, sharing machinery. So we felt it very wise to actually really use this kind of methodology to get the local manufacturers themselves who are on the ground, will always actually be on the ground, to actually be able to map themselves and continue really understanding their capacity as well. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we are focusing on in Uganda is really focusing in the more vulnerable areas of the country. So we're really focusing a lot more in the north and the northwestern part of the country, where we have quite a big number of refugees and refugee settlements across that region. We have refugee settlements like Palabek, Bidibidi, that is one of the biggest refugee settlements in Africa, as well as the Rhine refugee settlement, with cross-spanning of different nationalities across Uganda, DRC, as well as South Sudan. But really, in these areas, we always find that there's lots of self-sufficiency with Uganda's kind of refugee context. Most of the refugees within the country, but also the hosting communities, are allowed to really engage in different activities on their own and really thrive, as opposed to being only recipients of aid. So there's really lots of works going in within these areas, and we will be really working in these particular districts and regions across the northern part of Uganda, to actually really map where these manufacturers are, but really using the local people on the ground to actually keep moving and going to all the different regions. One of the beauty of actually using the locals is that even some of the areas that some of the manufacturers that may not be on the main road or across, that may be the biggest or well-known, can always be identified, because even the smaller, unknown manufacturers, or maybe smaller bases of people working a little bit more remotely, can actually be identified and actually mapped. And that is where we really see that it's really paramount to use the local people on the ground. And these are the areas that we should be really focusing in, that includes Gulu Town, Arua, as well as Lamu, that actually have so many of these refugee settlements, as well as internally displaced people as well. The next slide, please. So what we've done, we've basically used our friendly neighborhood, well-known data collection tool, which is Open Data Kit, and really mashed it up with the Hobo server, mainly because these are the tools that we find that are very easy for the community leaders, community people on the ground, the local manufacturers to actually easily use, understand, and reuse as well. We've really tried to simplify as much as we can the questions, and really broken down the questions with a mindset of actually getting to understand the manufacturer themselves. We did notice that yes, the open network standard model is actually quite large, but we really understand that to map someone is to begin a conversation with that person. And we really want, in the way we designed the form, was to actually have, that first conversation with someone, getting to know that person's name, what he does, and what he's trying to sell or he's trying to produce, because that is how you feel like, you get to know that person. And over time, you go further, it will be the deeper questions of the different kinds of machines that he actually has. And this has really given us that opportunity to have, not only one conversation with these different manufacturers, but a longevity of understanding and conversations that go beyond just having to know what they produce, but even how they want to produce it better, how they want to really increase their capacity, and really taking that to the next level. And really with this digitization, it allows us to make it easier to actually share information as well. We've always been very mindful of actually what people want to map, what people want to be known for, what information they really want to share. And that's why we really want to use this kind of very simple tool that actually gets people to collect that information, but also linking it with other sources as well. Next slide, please. So, like I said, on the ground, we are not working alone as HOT. We really get on the ground to actually involve the people that really understand even the manufacturing themselves. We are not 100% also manufacturers, but we do really want to work with people that really want to actually evolve this industry. And that is why we are working very closely with the Uganda Manufacturers Association, where we're getting a lot of guidance, a lot of support, a lot of access as well, to actually reach out to as many manufacturers within these areas, but also really show that we show our support to the association as well. Some of the supporters or people we are going to be really working with on the ground include Takataka Plastic. As you can see on the image there, they actually make face shields that have been used a lot across the country during this pandemic, as you have seen. But we're also not working only with the manufacturers, we're also working with some of the youth groups as well on ground, because most of actually these manufacturers work a lot with the youth groups through providing them employment, as well as skilling them and training them in creating some of these products. So we're working a lot with the Community Technology Empowerment Network, the Youth Empowerment Foundation, which really has a lot of both Ugandans, but also refugees from South Sudan and the DRC as well, and also including some of the national NGOs like Kulika that actually also get to work with both refugees as well as nationals across the country. And yeah, on to the next slide. Thank you.
This was brilliant, Theo. Thanks a lot. It's great to have an actual real use case as we do this launch. And I will now hand over to some of the biggest gray matter behind the standard. Andrew, this is you.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks, Deo, for your presentation there about the collection, the primary on-the-ground collection of data from Uganda in the first trial of the use of open nowhere in the field. I'm Andrew Lamb. I am the innovation lead for a humanitarian organization called Field Ready. I'm also a Shuttleworth Foundation Fellow, and I'm focusing a lot of my work around the concept of massive small manufacturing. So trying to enable distributed manufacturing, and part of that, some of the people on the call here today, some of the people presenting, has led to the formation of the Internet of Production Alliance and some of these data standards. So I'm currently the chair of the Internet of Production Alliance, representing Field Ready as a member of that alliance. And I'm very glad to be able to launch this today. It's a really exciting moment. And honestly, the number of aid agencies that have approached Field Ready, who for years I've been saying to them, we should really be sort of mapping local manufacturers, please will you resource that? The pandemic has happened, and they've come back to us and said, you know, that map of local manufacturers that you had, or that you were talking about, that idea that you were trying to develop, have you got that yet? Because now that the pandemic is around, we could really do with local manufacturing. So I'm really glad that this project has got started and is actually mapping not just in Uganda, but in Iraq, in Bangladesh, and in Kenya, and is providing some of the resource that I'm going to talk about now for the next steps with Open Nowhere. So Open Nowhere is being launched today. It's already been trialed. We're already getting suggestions for maintaining and improving the standard. One of the big priorities for us, however, will be to start issuing communications materials, more communications materials, user guides, you know, reassuring people that even though the standard is quite large, and you can go on to Barbel's online tools, standards repo, to have a look at the standard, you know, it can look very intimidating, but really what you need to know is a location, a contact, and a machine, and the rest of it is a bonus. So I think there's a very minimum requirement, and I think reassuring people with some of those communications materials is going to be a priority, because they can look quite intimidating at first glance. And then it's, you know, we're going to be resourcing a full-time member of staff to help people like you to adopt the standard and to promote the adoption of the standard to other organizations. So, you know, some of the screenshots that Anna Lowe was showing in her presentation that might have come from fablabs.io or hackerspaces, or, you know, the mappings done by local groups like Atelier in Turkey. You know, those sorts of organizations that have those data sets will be supported to be able to map the Open Nowhere standard into their database and vice versa. We're also going to be looking to translate the standard into other languages, so it's not just in English. But a big part of the Protecting the Frontline project that Deo was just speaking about is that we have contracted Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to establish a data system. We realized that for a lot of organizations, managing the data that's collected themselves isn't really an option. So we're going to be creating, under the Internet of Production Alliance, a data system for people to store their data in a well-managed data service from the Alliance. And so the stage we're at with that, just to be completely open about it, is that we are recruiting for that role. We are recruiting for the person to set up that data system. And I think we've had about 80 applications so far. Applications will be closing soon. We're hoping then to be able to start working with some of our partners here on the call today, and some other organizations like the Ugandan Manufacturers Association and you know, their database of manufacturers, to create some APIs so that data can be shared more freely. So we're still holding, you know, the idea in our heads that Anna mentioned earlier in the presentation, that we don't want to create a giant database. That what we want, or, you know, one system to rule them all. What we want is to create a data system, and that's what we're going to be building over the next few weeks and months. And you'll be hearing more updates about that through our Twitter feed and through our website, through our MailChimp mailing list from the Internet of Production Alliance. Then it's a case of actually sharing the data and actually being able to create systems where you can look at a map of Uganda and you can filter by who has an FDM 3D printer, where you can look at a map of the South Pacific and work out where the rotomolding machines are, where a manufacturer, this is a genuine example, who is currently in Cambodia, a designer in Cambodia, manufacturing in Vietnam has got a possible contract in Madagascar. They want to know where the injection molding factories are in Madagascar that other people have worked with. We'll be trying to do some of that work and publish it as make more of that work possible through the sharing of that data. Looking to engage with FabLabs.io or platforms like Hackaday and the data systems that SupplyFrame use to map all of their members as well. And so we're hoping then also that the more proprietary platforms like Sometry, like 3dhubs.com, those sorts of systems will be able to then use the platform too. The thing about the Open Nowhere standard and what the Internet of Production Alliance is trying to do is we're trying to create digital infrastructures to build an internet of production, to distribute and to decentralize manufacturing so that anyone can participate in production. So the idea is that you can use the Open Know-how documentation standard to find the designs of what you want to make. The next iteration of Open Know-how will be able to share and to make more portable and interactive those documentations, those designs, so that you can cross-reference. I want to make this product. Open Nowhere will tell you where you can make it. The skills and people standard that we're developing, that will help you figure out who can make it. And it's not just based on the contacts, the agents of the Open Nowhere standard. It might be the members of a makerspace. And so we're looking to engage in those sorts of systems in the next skills and people data standard that we're hoping to create for the Internet of Production Alliance. Work has begun. Casper from Kitspace has very kindly taken on the task of scoping out what an electronics components data standard might be to help enable the Internet of Production. And materials has been mentioned. We'll also be looking to scope out what a materials standard might need to do. And then Anna is going to be helping us understand some of the business models and then developing, over the next couple of years, a data standard around contracting. Contracts are fairly straightforward, but if you want to enable one-to-many contracting so that you can use the map to distribute a soap manufacturing contract across the refugees of northern Uganda so that they can make their own soap and be funded for that rather than the imports coming in from India or wherever. That's the kind of thing that would be made possible by that data standard. All of these things together will help to create an internet of production. And that's the sort of vision that we're aiming for. If you have any questions about that, my Twitter handle is on there. You can reach out directly. And if you've got some ideas about what you think the next steps need to be, if we've missed something here, if there's other things that are blocking you from adopting the standard, please keep in touch. We're very interested to hear. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Corinne, please. And Corinne, are you with us? Yes, great.
Hi there. I'm Karin Besaidnout. I'm a director of the Shuttleworth Foundation, and we're a small social investor who specifically focuses on initiatives that have open at their heart. And we're very excited about the standard, not only because it's open, but because it connects so many open ideas for us. For me, production is about four main things: getting the right product to the right people at the right time and at the right price. And getting that just right is an incredibly big undertaking, usually only really being successful if you're a multinational company. But that's not always viable, and it's also not always desirable, whether that's socially, environmentally, or economically. And for me, that's where open comes in. Open provides support in terms of the right product, by it being localized, by it being adapted, by being changed, customized, and adapted to where it's going to be used, and making it just right for those particular customers. Open also allows you to reach people that you never thought that you could reach with your product. It gets to geographic locations that is impossible to reach, or is not really viable, or even time-wise capable of getting to. And also the kinds of users maybe that the designer of each product or the manufacturer of a product didn't imagine. We can't imagine all of the use cases, and there are these opportunities that are dormant unless you know about them and unless there's openness involved where people can get to them. Open also helps in terms of getting it to people at the right time, because it's all about where it's needed most at the time that it's needed. Andrew and I often speak about disaster relief and the kind of timing that's necessary between a disaster taking place and that support being right there on the ground. And unless that's done locally, there is always a matter of wastage, either wasting time or wasting efforts in warehousing or in distribution. And Open allows for something to be produced timeously, locally, exactly where it's needed. And then thinking about the price is Open allows for cost effectiveness, whether that's social, environmental cost effectiveness, or just the price is wherever it's manufactured at scale or bespoke, whether one product is made or thousands are made, it's possible to think about what that is and what the right amount is and the right cost is for that environment and for that client. And so Open enables all these things to work together to get that right product, right person, right time, and right cost. And what makes that work is discoverability and interoperability. And that's where this open standard comes in. It's only by being able to connect all of those different types of open and people to be able to know, I've got a design, I've got a product, I've got manufacturing capabilities, I have this need, I do the distribution. All those different components can find each other and can be interoperable to be able to speak to each other to say, right, we're going to bring this all together and we're going to get this out. And that's why the standard is so incredibly important, is that it connects all of that. It creates the web, the network, all those little golden threads that connect these different components. And Andrew mentioned that the Internet of Production Alliance is working on a number of these things, but I think that the Open Nowhere is absolutely key because there is manufacturing capabilities out there. A lot of these fab labs and similar have tried to create some of that. It's not at scale, and it isn't nearly as specialized as the manufacturing capabilities that exist. And I think being able to find those and incorporate them in a new type of production paradigm is absolutely key. And so I'm very excited about this, and we're super happy to just have played a small part in it. And we want to thank everybody else who's been working on this, because I think it's the start of something that seems complex, but I think that if standards are involved and we can start using those and ironing those out, we'll be able to iron out some of the complexity and get to the actual thing that's really important, and that is getting products that's necessary into the hands of the right people. And that can only happen if they're manufactured. And so, yeah, I'm excited about this, and I'm excited to keep checking in to see how the standard evolves as everybody starts using it.
Thank you very much, Corinne. It's been a privilege to be able to work with the Shuttleworth Foundation on this. And thank you very much for being able to tell us why you did it today. I'll take back the microphone to tell you all a little bit more about what I'm sure is the most burning question on your mind, which is how can you get involved and what's happening next? I think probably the most important thing would be that if you want to know anything that is happening next, for you to sign up for our email list. You can sign up on it on the Internet of Production website, internetofproduction.org, unsurprisingly. If you type opennowhere.org, you will also get redirected to our Open Nowhere page, which is on that website. And I think if you take a takeaway from this, it is to contact us and book a meeting. Book a meeting to tell us about the data you have. Book a meeting with us to tell us that you want to adopt the standard but need some support in it. Get in touch. book a meeting to tell us about similar initiatives or other people that you know who are collecting data. This is the beginning, and it will be meaningful with the growing adoption. And that will only happen with the support and enthusiasm from every single person who attended today. More technical, more specifically, one of the other things that will be set up very soon that several of the speakers spoke about, I believe Anna started, is that we will be setting up some thematic working groups, including, well, adoption, as I was saying, but also sector-specific use guides. Andrew mentioned this, but the guide being, the standard being very extensive, we will be sort of cutting some of the work in some sectors, humanitarian settings, maker spaces, science application university, so that we create a curated version of the standard that will be ready to go or more easy to work with in those settings. So we will be creating working groups on that. Same thing, book a meeting, contact us if that's something that it would be of interest to you, your organization, or somebody that you know of. I think this is where I close off the official speaking part and say thank you very much to all the attendees and turn over to all of you. Thank you very much to all of the panelists and turn over to you attendees. Some of you have already asked quite a number of questions. I hope you all know how to find the Q&A section. There were some questions that have been answered. Remember to go check that part out. I do see that there are some questions that are still open for answer. Do some of the speakers maybe want to have a look at the questions and think if they might be able to answer this question?
Sure, I can take one that's actually in the
answered
chat, if that's okay, Barbara. Hi, Naomi Lundman, and good to hear from you again. How will the on-the-ground machinist manufacturers and so on inform the standards, especially regarding the competence standards? So this is about what happens next. I think the Open Nowhere example is a really good one. I think Anna, as the chair of the working group that created the Open Nowhere standard, was able to reach out to a lot of different people from all over the world. The idea of the process of the way the Internet of Production Alliance creates standards is that process should be open, which is why we're using a tool provided by Bartley, by Tom's company, so to a platform so that people can put their comments and suggestions in that. There aren't many tools like that, I must say, because you might end up using a Google Doc and it getting very messy. But I think the idea with the skills and people standard in terms of what comes next and how this relates to the way that the Internet of Production Alliance works, it is going to be very much about finding people who want to take part in it. And if anyone here and you, Naomi, perhaps have some suggestions of who might be a good group or good person to input into that, please do let us know and get in touch with us about that. We've got about 70 different initiatives that have been doing badging in makerspaces so far. So that was a little bit about what's next. Perhaps someone else can pick up the questions related to the Open Nowhere standard here. Perhaps on the relationship between, also in the chat, between the Open Nowhere standard and OpenStreetMap. Tom, perhaps you can pick that up.
Yeah, so the question is relating to could OpenStreetMap be referenced as a data field and location? It wasn't something that came up. We had a stakeholder group, as Anna said, of about 18 people, including, I think, representation from HOTS towards the end. The Open Nowhere standard is a starting point from which people can share data, and the key thing being it's allows people to map or collect data sets in any kind of format, in whether they're doing something very lo-fi through a basic forms collection tool, or using a system like OpenStreetMap to store data. I'm sure that's something that could be extended if the committee got together and decided it was something that was necessary. But really, we kind of went down to the core. What do people need, and what are people currently using? And they were the three types of location that people were using in the data sets that we saw. Hope that answers the question. It's kind of a complicated technical question.
Deo, since you work with OpenStreetMap every day, humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, Deo, could you say a little bit about your experience of using this standard with OpenStreetMap, please?
Yes, so with using the standard in OpenStreetMap, definitely most of the information can be uploaded onto the platform. Obviously, with some of the privacy parts that may not definitely go to the platform, but most of the information, the location information, a little bit of even the machinery information as well. It's something that has also been getting to be developed a little bit more in OpenStreetMap with the OpenStreetMap tagging system. And really we see that OpenStreetMap also is an evolving kind of tagging platform that actually still has more space to grow, especially in the manufacturing and mapping of manufacturers as well. So I do see that even as we do our mapping, as we continue growing the need for actually having manufacturers map, there will definitely be more possibilities to actually add more information from the OpenNOIA standard onto the OpenStreetMap. But at the moment, there's lots of information around the contacts, the location, and manufacturing capacity, and a few other also components added to OpenStreetMap.
Thanks, Tyler. Back to you, Barbara.
I see that you have noted that there are two specific questions in the question and answer section. One of them about whether we would recommend the mapping of a specific makerspace. Andrew, you noted that you would like to answer this question live?
I think I clicked the wrong button.
Okay. That was intriguing.
Yes, where would you recommend to map it? You map it at the moment, a simple Excel spreadsheet, and that is something you could share with us, and we could include that. And we do have a template, a CSV, or an Excel sheet you can use. And to answer the next question, there's no reason why we can't convert that into a JSON schema as well. We just haven't quite done that yet. So yeah, I think that what we'll do is we'll publish some examples on the OpenNOIA website, so you can see some of that. And as you develop your makerspace in Nigeria, you'll be able to keep your data more up to date. So watch this space for the data system that I mentioned, but in the meantime, a spreadsheet and we'll see if we can get the JSON schema out.
I just wanted to come in on that too, and I think this also relates to the question that has been answered already. That's about the quality of the data. It's a huge problem, and one of the first things we noticed when we were looking at all of these data sets is that a large number of them are already really outdated, that they were collected for a specific purpose, and that hasn't been maintained. And there are some circumstances in which you can imagine ongoing mapping initiatives, perhaps involving something like OpenStreetMap team or humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, where volunteers are going out and sort of prompting people to collect the data. But ultimately, I think that the systems that are designed based on this are going to have to move towards a situation where people are keeping their own information updated, as Andrew was just saying. And the incentive to do that in most cases is going to be for some kind of business model. I mean, what we really want is for this standard to enable small scale local manufacturers to get more business. So more people will come to them because they can find them through this standard, and that creates the incentive for them to keep their own information up to date.
We have a question in the chat on whether, yeah, how will the, did we answer the question about how on-the-ground machinists themselves will be able to inform the standards and assess skills and people in each production facility, right?
Yep. I spoke to that about the people and skills standard. Yeah.
Then I believe, unless an attendee wants to write the question again, that we have addressed most of the questions that were in the chat. Do apologize if there was a question that I missed. We have one question left, which I believe was briefly addressed, but about the format that was selected and why it was not a YAML format.
Yeah, I mean the format. We're not specifying a format at the moment for the data system, and that's we're recruiting the person who's going to be building that data system. That is, if you don't already have your own data system for this data. We're not specifying that within this open nowhere standard, and I think there's, we're aiming for this to be a little bit more like a data model, I guess. Tom, maybe you should speak to it.
Yeah, I think Andrew, the key difference between this and open know-how was about discoverability of designs, and so having a consistent format that everyone adopted was important because we were really about broadcasting that information and allowing it to be discovered. With open nowhere, we recognize that actually most people are going to be doing their mapping for their own purposes, not for the purposes of exchanging that information with other organizations. But what we wanted to do was create a mechanism through which they could exchange that information, and that might be bilaterally rather than through like a publishing based process. So we deliberately steered clear of formats because it seemed an unnecessary thing to specify at this stage. We saw a lot of people using Excel, some people using Airtable, some people using proper relational databases and kind of everything in between, and so, blockchain and all that kind of jazz, so the whole spectrum of the way that data is collected and structured. And so we deliberately stayed clear of it because the idea is people go collect data for themselves and then they can exchange it with people when it makes sense to do so. And I think, Anna, you mentioned the security aspects, and Deo, you've picked up on the security aspects of this. There is sensitivity in the data relating to that could be collected and mapped by open nowhere. Someone might not want to know or have the fact that they have an expensive machine in their living room being published to the world, but they're happy for an agency to know that so that they can share it with trusted parties. And so using it as a model rather than a format allowed that flexibility and kind of that purposeful thinking that needs to go through, particularly when security is a concern.
Thanks a lot, Tom. There is a question in the Q&A section about the internet governance model for the evolution of the standard. And this will be a perfect question for you to talk about, I think, Anna, and about how the working group will function. And maybe mention that there is talk about recruiting a specialist to support that work.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, and I know that we need to be wrapping this up, so I'll try and answer that very quickly. But yeah, absolutely. The version that has been released at the moment is the first version. The objective of that is to get something out and into testing. We are starting to collect, as Andrew mentioned, suggestions that come in. There have been several made during the course of this webinar today. I think I'm not aware that we yet have a firm date for sort of kicking off an exercise to review the standard. When we got to the end of the work we did on it last year, we said that we wanted to have at least sort of 6 months of using it in the real world to be able to collect a good number of things that needed to be added to it or changed or whatever. But I would imagine sometime towards the towards quarter 3, quarter 4 of this year, that we would start to look at, what extent of revision would be necessary, and we would do that by picking up the working group. Everyone who took part before would be contacted again, and we would also contact any new people who had made suggestions, or people we've come in contact with over the intervening time who we thought might be interested. And so it'll be the process will be as open as possible. It'll be documented online as it was previously, and anyone who is interested is able to join that process.
Again, reach out to us if you would like to be involved in that in the governance part of the standard. We are, as you said, conscious of time. We're 3 minutes over time. I perfectly understand if any of you need to go now, and want to thank you for being here today. For those who are able to stay a little bit more and wait for me to thank the panelists, there's one more question in the Q&A section, which you might be interested in hearing, which is, will there be more trainings on the whole mapping process? If you are in Uganda, I would probably hand over the question to Deo. But other than that, I think, Andrew, are we thinking about trainings on the whole mapping process itself?
Yeah, there's an idea that what we might be able to do is just share our experiences from the 4 countries where mapping is taking place. But I think one of the more instructive examples is going to come after about June time, when we start to use some of the platforms that have a lot of data already, and how they have managed to convert, say the FabLabs.io platform to the Open Nowhere standard. But for the mapping process, the sort of primary data collection processes, one of the things that we'd like to be able to do, particularly with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, but also here at Field Ready, is share some of our experiences of how that's done. Everything that is going to be under the Protecting the Frontline project, which is being used as the trial, is open. So all of the survey tools that we're developing, the data system, the way that's structured, that's all going to be open. So as we build them on that live project, we'll be sharing them through the Internet of Production Alliance mailing list. So, so the answer is yes, watch this space.
And last look at the Q&A, and there is a question from James Butler.
I think that's an answer
That
to
is
a
an
previous
answer.
question. So
Great.
Your answers, your answer at the moment, James, is you don't really understand the question. So there's always one, isn't there? But let's leave it at that, Barbara. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists and everybody who attended. We are very proud to have launched the Open Nowhere standard.
Thank you all for coming, and we'll be in touch. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. All right.